Just thinking.
And the broadcast
Good.
is live.
The podcast is live. Good evening, guys. Welcome to Weekend Warrior Podcast. I know it's been a while. As the saying goes, life happens. New jobs, new challenges, all that kind of stuff. There's also a but familiar face, Brian Minnie from Paratus. Welcome on the show, standing in for Grobby tonight. And of course, our illustrious guest, Mr. Robin Horsfall. Welcome on the show, sir. SAS, Paras, it's like, I don't even know where to start. I think he's going to color it in for us even more, but welcome on the show, gents.
Good to be
thank
here.
you very much, Rob. Sorry, Robin, you're the guest. You carry on.
It's good to be here and chill out on a Sunday afternoon.
Wow, Sunday afternoon chill out's always really cool. But Rowan, you missed a few things, because not only is Robin all of those things that you mentioned, and certainly those are fairly significant accomplishments in and of themselves. But you also forgot that we're sitting here with a fairly illustrious author, motivational speaker, and thought leader in terms of the interface between, and Robin, correct me if I'm wrong here, but certainly this has been my experience of everything that you put out, the interface of reality with some misconceptions of what soldiering is, what soldiering used to be, and what soldiering should be in the future. Does that sort of ring fairly accurate with you, Robin?
Yeah, I think you're right there, Brian. There's a tendency when we have a long period of peace to get into the cartoon caricatures of soldiering, where people imagine that they all want to be soldiers. They watch the movies, the hero always wins, the bad guy dies and says his last heroic words, and everybody's happy. And that's not soldiering as we know. It's a very different thing. And then a war begins. People go to war and they all come back shocked because it wasn't what they thought it would be.
Absolutely. Rowan, I know you wanted to chat with Robin a little bit about how he got started in getting to where he is today. So you maybe want to get on that one, because I'm fairly keen to tap into his insight into
the
what's
juicy
happening
stuff
today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Robin, just, we've got, quite a wide variety of guests, listeners on the show. So, just take us a little bit back. Where you from, where you grew up, how you ended up on the path that you are on now. In your own words, who's Robin Horsfall?
Okay, well, I came from a fairly dysfunctional family, as most people do. My mother had me when she was 17 years old. My father was in prison. He divorced her from prison when I was 7. And a man called Jeffrey Horsfall married my mother and adopted me, gave me his name. And I was a bright kid, but my family life was very unsatisfactory. My dad, he dealt with the problems by beating the hell out of me. And when I was 14, I decided that I was going to change my life and join the army. And they said, well, you're too young, but you can come back next year. And in 1972, it was the age of joining the British Army was 15. So I went off to join the Royal Army Medical Corps because I wanted to be a medic, and ended up in the Parachute Regiment. How that happened, I don't know. I was an infantry junior leader, a boy soldier for 2 years, which was formative and very, very important part of my life. It gave me mentors, it gave me stability, it gave me education, it gave me skills. And at the age of 17 and a half, I became a full-time member of the Parachute Regiment. I did 3 tours with them in Northern Ireland, and then joined the SAS when I was 21. Served 6 years with the SAS. And then I, for complicated reasons that are in my book, Fighting Scared, I then moved on and became a bodyguard and mercenary. At one point, I was a major in Frelimo in Mozambique after the Russians had left. And after I came back from there, my wife put her foot down and said, if you do that again, I won't be here when you come home. So, which was a fortunate thing, because I had some problems with PTSD after that war, which I had to cope with. It took a long time. Because I couldn't go abroad, I started teaching. I started teaching kids martial arts in London. and built one of the biggest martial arts organizations for children in the world, with at one point having over 1,000 kids between the age of 4 and 15, plus some adults, of course. And that company's still running. I broke my neck when I was 54, and I couldn't do that anymore. So I handed the business over to my son, and that's London Karate. And I went to university as an undergrad at the age of 56 and did English Lit with creative writing. Graduated when I was 59. No one wants to sit next to their grandpa at school. Nobody. It's a weird experience being with, a class that is 95% female under the age of 23, and you're a 54-year-old grandfather. So that's I had to learn some very different skills during that period of my life. And then I moved on and started. I couldn't do martial arts anymore, so I started writing, and I've written some good books. I'm a pundit on TV. I do corporate talks about various different aspects of my life and how they relate to business and how they relate to people's problems, and take it from there. That's it in a nutshell.
So, Robin, that's you know what, one can't say, wow, you've by any means lived the normal life, right? I think you've definitely charted your own pathway, but charted a very unique pathway. But if I may ask, one thing that I'd like to understand a little bit more of, and this is from a fairly selfish point of view, because I've got two young men who I'm raising, my two sons, and one of them is now of the age where they're also making some career choices, and they're very, very firmly want to embark on the military pathway. Could you maybe you kind of started to unpack everything that being a boy soldier meant to you, but can you maybe look at it at a little bit, unpack it a little bit, just in terms of how it gave you the character that it did give you? Because
Brian,
again,
can I just interrupt a moment?
Sure.
There's a voice in the background from one of you.
My
and it's
apologies.
Almost like a TV, and I'm only getting pieces of what you're saying. So I'm getting kind of like a TV voice coming over in the background, and it's breaking up. It's breaking up the conversation.
Let me see if I can sort that right out. My apologies, Robin.
Is it
probably is.
It's part and parcel of a recording from home.
The dog isn't barking in the corner, is it?
Well, it was interesting now with all the stuff that happened over the last 2 years with COVID and what, and people working from home. All of a sudden, it's not strange to sit in a morning meeting and there's a child running past your colleague's screen. Yeah. And somebody with pajamas in the background. So, I think everybody's a little bit of okay with that stuff nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I love having kids around. I love having the family around. But when it was just I couldn't concentrate on what you were saying, because I had this kind of this person in the background dominating what you were trying to do, as probably normal in the household.
Most definitely, and also, earlier on, I was busy with a little home DIY project. We're busy building a few cupboards here, so that was kind of carrying on. I thought my earphones were doing a better job of cutting it out. But
what was the question again?
Okay, so the question is this: could you unpack a little bit more about the character formation that being a boy soldier provided you? You kind of alluded to it a little bit more, but I just, you've led a fantastic life, and you've also been able to restart yourselves restart your career quite a few times, reinvent yourself, and that is purely because of the character that you have, which also again shines through in the book. But I'll stop waffling now and ask if you could maybe unpack that formative process that being a boy soldier was.
Yeah, boy soldiers. I wasn't a particularly tough kid. In many ways, lacking a male role model and a good father figure. I hadn't been taught how to laugh at myself. I hadn't been taught how to build up my physical confidence with wrestling with your dad on the floor and all those masculine things that are fairly normal for a kid with a decent father. So when I got to be a boy soldier, I was running away from one bad situation in many ways into another, where there were some pretty tough lads from all over the country, from some of the hardest parts of the UK. And initially I found myself isolated. The first time somebody hit me, I didn't hit them back, and that made me a target for the rest of the gang. And when I did learn to get back, then I'd usually go over the top, and consequently, you don't end up with any friends. You just don't end up getting beaten up anymore. But going to the actual boys' service, it gave me the big thing that it gave me was an ability to teach, because the last 6 months of the 2-year program was all about teaching, and I loved being in front of a group, imparting knowledge to them and seeing it work. So if I took one thing away from that 2 years that was so vital and important, it was the confidence to put together a lesson, to stand up in front of a class, to control it, and to get that information across in such a way that it was enjoyable and it was fun. And even in the later years, when I was running London Karate, you'd be stood in front of a class of 4 and 5 year olds and coming out with the kind of military humor, like, call that punching, I can kiss harder than that. Ask your mum. And so on. There's a great deal in that 15 to 17-year-old time that taught me to work on my own, taught me to manage, taught me to deal with adversity, taught me to overcome personal animosities, how to deal with isolation, how to deal with loneliness, and how to maintain your self-esteem. And I got my self-esteem by doing everything I could to the absolute maximum of my ability. So maybe people didn't like me, but I could run faster than them. I could carry more weight than them. I could do my job better than them, and they couldn't take that away from me. And so that's where I got my self-esteem from. And that could be viewed by some people as having a chip on my shoulder, and they'd probably be right. But that was just me and my personality and the circumstances that created me.
Robin, would you say that your decision to join the Parachute Regiment was almost kind of, you need to prove something to yourself, that you are tougher? It's a next challenge, kind of making that, that next step. I'll show you how tough I am.
It wasn't really a decision that I made. As I said, I wanted to be a medic. I'd been a St. John's ambulance boy. I used to get into the football for free with my badge and berry on and my medical kit, and that's what I actually wanted to be. And I did succeed. That became an important part of my life later as I became an SAS paramedic. But no, it wasn't my decision. They was basically saying, no, you can't be a medic. And if you want to join the army, this is what's available. And yeah, I think my stepfather had been attached to the 16th Para Brigade in Aldershot, where I grew up. The Paras were local. They were, from my boyish point of view, extremely tough guys. So there was an attraction there. I wanted to be one of those tough guys because I wasn't. Yeah. But it wasn't really my choice. It certainly wasn't my first choice.
So, sorry, Rowan, if I may ask, when did the martial arts start playing a role in your life?
When
was this in the army or?
Yeah, I was in the SAS, and I got into the SAS in January 1979, and we were deeply involved in undercover work in Northern Ireland. And so all our practice, all our training was with handguns and short weapons, submachine guns and so on. And there was no unarmed combat training. And one of my best friends, who was my best man later, Bob Carey, said, I'm going down the local town to join a karate club. And I went with him. And so what would I have been? I'd have been 23 at that time. And it gripped me. It gripped me straight away. I loved it. I loved the discipline. I loved the skills, because by that time I could fight. I mean, in the sense that I could stand up for myself and I could be brutal and vicious, but I couldn't fight with any skills. And when you get those skills, you don't resort to anger and aggression straight away, because you know you can deal with a problem. You know you can resort to that if the circumstances force you into that position, but you have the confidence to use your voice. You have the confidence to use your brain. You have the confidence to step back a bit and think about what you're doing before you pile in. And so martial arts is a lot of people who aren't martial artists or who haven't had good teachers will think that martial arts is all about fighting. But in many ways, it's about building a confident, strong human being who actually becomes a kinder person because of that confidence and strength.
Yeah, you're getting lots of nods. Martial arts is very important, both to Ron and myself.
Yeah, well, my style's big in South Africa, Shukakai. And it's a big style in South Africa, and some of the world's top teachers during my formative years in martial arts actually came from South Africa, and they were great guys, lovely people, not just great martial artists and great teachers, but lovely people to go with it. And it was I did martial arts for nearly just over 30 years until I broke my neck. So and it's my son now. That's another 50 press-ups, Brian. You know that.
Oh, it's going to have to be. It's going to have to be. But I'll do that just a little bit.
Robin, one thing that I would love to touch on is your time in Ireland, because the reason why is, the troubles and the conflicts in in that part of the world. And I think Brian will agree with me. It is not something that is really on the front page of the South African mindset. It's kind of, was kind of localized, and it wasn't, it wasn't a Vietnam or a Korean war where there was, South Africans involved or anything like that. No. So, but it is something that, I've read up a little bit on, and I'm very interested in it. But what I wanted to get to was, in a certain sense, and you can tell me if I'm talking nonsense, you come in as a regular uniformed soldier, but you're effectively fighting let's call it an enemy of for all intents and purposes, civilians. And surely that must come with certain challenges.
It comes with big challenges. Most of the world doesn't know about the history of South Africa because they're not interested. They knew about it during the apartheid years and the changes, but those are the main points that stick in their memory and they picked up in the media. And even fewer people know about the history of Northern Ireland and the fact that 100 years ago there was a partition in Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland in the south became an independent country, and a small part in the north remained part of the United Kingdom. And that was fundamentally a divide between Catholic and Protestant as well. But there was a minority Catholic population in the north. And as the 100 years passed, that Catholic minority became oppressed. They had their rights reduced. They couldn't get jobs. They couldn't get housing. And so they started going on civil rights marches. And those civil rights marches were attacked by extremists on the I've got to get the words, loyalist side. As law and order broke down, the two communities started attacking and killing each other. So law and order broke down, and the British and the Labour government at the time sent the British Army in to stand between the two groups and keep them separate and stop them from killing each other. In other words, to maintain law and order and to support the police. So there wasn't martial law, there wasn't a war, there was simply soldiers standing in the middle of two groups that wanted to kill themselves. And when you get in between two people who want to kill each other, you end up getting killed in the middle. And there was a lot of bad politics and a lot of mistakes. And they brought in internment, which was arrest and imprisonment without trial, which was a big mistake. You can go back and in hindsight always see the mistakes that governments made. But the victims at the end of the day tended to be the soldiers. Over 50,000 people were wounded or killed during the 30 years that the conflict in Northern Ireland existed. The death figures are relatively low, but there was over 1,000 soldiers killed in Northern Ireland. And almost all of those soldiers were murdered by the Irish Republican Army or groups associated with them. In other words, the extremist Catholic organization. So, it was really, really tough. And now you get 50 years later. And bear in mind that I was born in 1957. 50 years before I was born, the First World War was in full view. It was in full flow. So that's the distance between now and my early years in Northern Ireland. And now people are trying to go back there and look back 50 years and try to convict soldiers for actions that they carried out in defense of the public, not for the purpose of gaining justice, but to create a new narrative where every terrorist was a freedom fighter and every soldier was a murderer. And that's sad. And I've been fighting a campaign in the UK for the last 6 years, trying to change the law to stop these soldiers who had been previously investigated and cleared from being prosecuted again. And there's legislation going through Parliament now. It was read in the Queen's speech a few days ago, and we're hoping to stop these unfair prosecutions. And that's a big part of my group, which is the Northern Ireland Veterans Movement. So another story, another string to my bow. Very complicated.
I was actually going to.
We've had quite a few, members from,
Robin, give me a second. Sorry. So, Robin, I was actually going to congratulate you because that's a very worthwhile campaign, and it's something I certainly follow very closely on the social media avenues that you and I share. So, congratulations on getting that change. It's my own personal opinion. It's utterly horrendous that soldiers get treated in the manner that some of the politicians are doing it. Now, I'm very glad you've been able to spearhead that campaign. So well done on that.
Thank you.
Sorry, Rowan, you wanted to ask something because I've got another question about Northern Ireland. So you let me know.
Yeah, no, Robert, I'll go ahead. Yeah, we've had quite a number of guests, from the military or special forces community on the show, and a question that I ask every time, because it's always kind of interesting to get their opinion from the people that were there. If you look at the conflicts, whether it was Northern Ireland or what happened here in South Africa or the South African border war, wherever, there's always a kind of a narrative that's pushed in the media, whether for whatever your bias is on. And then there is the thoughts from the men that were actually there and faced the adversary in question. If you take an organization like the IRA, what do you think is probably one of the biggest misconceptions about them as an organization that people believed or thought that was true, that you, having been there, can look back and say, that was complete nonsense?
I think the big problem with the modern narrative is that they're trying to create a new history where they were fighting for freedom, and they weren't. They took advantage of a situation, a political situation, to dominate their own communities, to control the bookkeepers, to extort from the local. They're a criminal organization, to extort from the local community, to carry out their own punishments and killings and murderers on the grounds that they were doing it for the people, and they weren't. They were doing it for their own enrichment, and that's sad, because in many ways I think Northern Ireland would have been resolved many years ago if the criminal elements had been able to keep law and order in place and the criminal elements out of it. And there's still a criminal organization today, and even Sinn Féin, which is the main Republican political group now, is trying to distance themselves from the Irish Republican Army. So that would be the thing. They're a criminal organization. They're not freedom fighters. They weren't occupied by a foreign power. They did have the community they claim to represent did have justification for mounting protests, for demanding change in the law and equal rights. And that shouldn't be forgotten either. I mean, in many ways, I sympathized with their situation as a young soldier. Being English, you're not really politically directed regarding religious differences. My cousins are Polish Catholics, but if you were Scottish or Northern Irish, then it was a huge part of your upbringing and your belief system. But for me, and for most of my colleagues, we were there. We didn't care who the bad guys were and which side they came from. If somebody, and you didn't ask first, if somebody was holding a gun and pointing at you, you were going to shoot them.
How effective were they as a fighting force?
Very poor. They were tough individuals who would absolutely stand and fight you. The Irish are renowned for fighting. I think it was Montgomery said the Irish aren't fighting somebody else; they're fighting each other. So they're very good fighters. But as an organization, when they tried in 1973 to come out on the streets against the British Army and arm themselves heavily in the Ballymurphy, they got slaughtered because they weren't capable of acting like soldiers. So then they resorted to snipers and they resorted to bombs in pubs and blowing up women and children in Northern Ireland initially, and then in London and Glasgow and Manchester and even in Germany. Anywhere that, and people who were playing music on a bandstand, soldiers riding horses on parades down streets, kids in bars in Guildford, it just went on and on and on. So they resorted to extremism, extreme versions of murder to justify themselves, and they still justify themselves today for the same reasons.
No, sorry, Robin. A lot of my background, and certainly now I can safely say two careers ago, I was a police officer in South Africa working in the intelligence units there. And everything that I've read about the methodology of operations conducted both within the conventional military as well as by other units such as yourselves, such as 14 Ent, etc. There was a lot of correlation between how we were dealing with gangs, certainly in the Western Cape, a lot of correlation with how we were dealing with the Abalone poaching gangs and how what you guys were doing there. And, obviously there's correlation because methodologies are methodologies regardless of why you're doing them. But, you always have to do observation, and observation can only be done one way correctly or a few ways correctly. So there's that, but also the motivation that I saw in the gangs and what I read about the motivation within the Republican movements seemed to be very similar. It was primarily about, increase of personal power, profits, criminal endeavors, rather than any sort of, grand goal.
That's right. It's mainly follow the money. You may find that the people at the bottom of the pyramid are fighting for their cause, but the people who are controlling them at the top of the pyramid are living in mansions in other countries and driving in the top brand new Mercedes and telling them what a great job they're doing.
Isn't that funny with all of these extremist movements? The higher up the leadership chain you get, the less the ideology matters.
Well, it's you mentioned the social media groups that we communicate on, that I write on every day. I do that because there's a strong part of human nature to believe whatever they're told. If I tell you now at this particular moment in time that I'm 72 years old, why would you disbelieve it? You wouldn't. In fact, I'm 65, but that would become the new truth for you. And if you told somebody else, you'd be telling the truth. And the media do an awful lot of that. And their vested interest is to make money. their vested interest is to get clicks, to get coverage, to get viewers, and to sell advertising. So if you can make people emotional and angry, it doesn't matter whether it's the truth, it gets them to click on to your particular page. So I started writing and posting because in circumstances where there was no monetary return, so that accusation couldn't be thrown at me. It was researched, it was to a degree, it was eloquent, it was not personal, and every day, every couple of days, and people start to see and notice the difference because you don't have that vested interest. You're not turning around and putting a question mark at the end of a statement, which is called hiding, a journalist trick of hiding behind the question mark. You know, did Rowan Heiberg hit his children yesterday? And the answer, of course, is no, he didn't. But you have made that statement as your headline. And how many people only read the headlines? And it's that kind of nonsense that I see in national media, not just in sidelines, in the national media, on the main media streams, on television every single day. And I find it insidious and dangerous to, you're not giving people information where they can make sensible decisions about. You're provoking them, you're prodding them all the time to make money, and that's wrong.
Oh, isn't that just the truth about media today?
Big soapbox.
So Ryan, if you'll forgive me here. So here we are. We're with you in Northern Ireland right now, and I'm assuming this was close to one of your first deployments after you'd entered the regiment, correct? You'd gone now from the Parachute Regiment over to 22nd SAS. This being one of your first. So did this happen when your first deployment was in 79, correct?
No, my first tour of Northern Ireland was 1975.
75, okay,
Yeah.
But that was with the Parachute Regiment.
Yeah.
Okay,
and then with the SAS in 1979, yeah.
So certainly with the in 75 with the Parachute Regiment, I mean the role that the regiment played there is well documented, and as you said, you were in a time period where the IRA tried to stand up and be a heavyweight boxer, only to discover they were quite significantly outmatched.
Yeah.
And not only by the Paras, of course. I remember reading a few accounts of them trying to do so-called flying column raids from the Republic into Ireland and getting themselves horrendously taught the difference between a drive-by shooting and good solid infantry tactics by whoever the regiment was down at the border.
Yeah.
A squad of infantry can do amazing things. But when you went over with the SAS, you were doing, or you being the regiment itself, was doing a lot of pioneering in terms of the tactics in the day. If again, correct me, you were the one who was there, not me. But you were doing a lot of developing the small unit tactics and the individual tactics that your own regiment would use later, but also other units like 14 Int, etc., would adopt. How was that time period for you? You know, putting together, learning all these new things and applying it.
Well, I think initially it was quite exciting. You've gone from being a soldier that's going to patrol the streets, 2 hours out on the streets, 2 hours back in the barracks, 4 hours out on the streets, 2 hours back in the barracks, in the toughest and hardest areas in Ireland, or in South Armagh, where you're out for maybe 2 weeks at a time patrolling the border and getting resupplied by helicopter. And then you go into this specialist unit where you grow your hair long, you get a big droopy mustache like a Mexican bandit, and you wear which was the style of the boyos in Northern Ireland at the time. And you put a donkey jacket on, and you're out on the ground, and you're working on specific information, and your intelligence gathering, and you're doing things in a far more secretive manner. And that was interesting. It was exciting, but it was nowhere near as dangerous as the patrolling the streets as a normal infantryman, where you're just waiting to to have an explosion go off, or you're waiting for a shot to open, because the enemy was choosing the ground and the time all the time. So you had to develop skills there that were very different, very assertive, but you're putting yourself out as a target every single day. Whereas when you're in plain clothes and you're undercover, you have a far greater control of the situation, and you're more heavily armed too. So, yeah, in terms of the excitement, in terms of the soldiering, I actually preferred it as a paratrooper than as an SAS soldier. Very different. Yeah, very different when I went to the Falklands. I mean, that was back to conventional warfare. And although I did very little, our mission was to go into Argentina and on a one-way trip and not come back. So, and again, when I got down to Mozambique as a major, we had no air cover, no heavy artillery, and it was a pure infantry war. So very, very different circumstances. I think the most scary war I was ever in was the one in Mozambique.
Robin, I want to rewind a little bit, because it's a question that I asked a previous member from a special forces community, and it's always interesting to get the mindset that led to the decision. When you were in the Parachute Regiment, you decided, all right, fine, you want to do selection, for SAS, and how did you prepare yourself for that physically? But it's actually because one thing that always comes up is the mental aspect of going into selection. And every book you read, there's physical, but it's very much up here. And every operator that I've spoken to on the show, and from private network, is there's a mental component that they prepped for. What did you do? How did you do it? How did you see it? Yeah, maybe just talk to us a little bit about selection.
Well, I was 21 years old, and the average age of a SAS soldier back in 1978 was 27, 28 years old. But the only reason I put myself forward to go to the SAS and volunteered was because my guided missile platoon in the Parachute Regiment had been disbanded, and they wouldn't let me go back to my parent battalion, which was 2 para. They were going to force me to stay in 1 para, and they told me previously that I could go back to where I wanted to go to. So they broke their promise, and I knew that if I went upstairs to the battalion clerk's office and put in these papers, that they couldn't stop me from going on SAS selection. So I did it to cock a snoot at authority. It wasn't a big ambition of mine. It was right. You've broken your promise. I know what you can't stop me doing. And there was a Yorkshireman in the back of the clerk's office, and he said, with his Yorkshire accent, he said, "I don't know why you're doing that, Horsfall." He said, "You're far too young. You'll be back with your tail between your legs, you wanker." And anyway, he was wrong. But going back to the main point of your question, the preparation. So I turned up there in summer '78, and I went on my own with my little Vauxhall Viva car and my tent and my sleeping bag, and I went and lived in the mountains in Wales for about 3 weeks on my own, walking every day. And then I discovered that I could actually have lived in the camp in Hereford and got fed every day. So I moved into the camp and carried on. And summer '78, I did selection, and I got the penultimate day of test week, and I wasn't mentally strong enough to keep going. I was physically strong enough, but mentally I wasn't. My rucksack at Bergen had eaten 2 big ulcers in my back, which were bleeding and sore, and I had a 40-mile march to do the next day. And thinking about the next day rather than the day in hand, I withdrew. But I thought, oh, I'm going to go back to see that Yorkshireman, aren't I? But they thought I had potential, so they kept me in Hereford for the next 5 months, so that I could do it again in the January. And during that 5 months, I used to get up in the morning because we had free entry into the local swimming pool at 6 o'clock. I'd do 1,000 meters swim in the pool. I'd have breakfast, I'd go on an 8-mile run, and then I'd go out into the up the mountains and walk in the mountains and do some of the routes and map read and so on. And then I'd do that 5 days a week and go out and eat lots and lots of pie and chips and lots of beer in the evening and put the fuel back and do it over and over again. And I've got photographs of myself on the first selection and the second selection. In that 5 months, the change in my physical appearance is quite obvious. And yet I was a fit young paratrooper, but I was nowhere near a fit mount. The sort of, I had the look of a fit mountaineer, an athlete by the time I'd finished. Now selection is a year long, but the first month is in the mountains. Then the final 5 days are called test week. And test week is the equivalent of doing 6 marathons over 5 days with weights that increase from 35 to 55 pounds on your back, with your rifle and your water and your food added on top of that alone. So if anybody wants to make a genuine program about SAS selection, it would be the most boring program in the world, because it's guys on their own, nobody kicking their ass, nobody encouraging them, nobody making them do anything they don't want to do, just going from A to B and doing their job. And if they can't do it, if they can't achieve it, or if it's too much for them, they just go back to where they came from. It's as simple as that. Selection then goes on to continuation training. You live in the jungle, you work in 4-man groups. You then go on to combat survival training. If you're not already a paratrooper, you then do your parachute training. You then get badged, you join your squadron, and you're on probation for 6 months. And in that 6 months, you have to learn a personal skill and you have to learn a troop skill. My troop was mountain troop, and my personal skill was as a paramedic. And at the end of that year, if you've done everything right and the guys like you, you're allowed to stay for another 2 years, and then you're reassessed again. You can stay for another 3. And that's the story of SAS selection. The mental preparation is important. The first time I did it, I was young, I was fit, but I wasn't mentally ready. The second time I was, and only 8 of us passed on the second one. 1 person died.
Oh. You know, it seems that element of doing things by yourself is a huge differentiator. I was listening to, I believe it was Combat Story, who's a US-based podcast. And they were chatting with a person who came from, Robin, you'll forgive me if I say it, the rough equivalent of the SAS in the US Army. We can't say what name they are because they seem to have a new one every few years or so. They're either Delta Force or Combat Applications Group, or whatever they're calling themselves.
I worked with Delta. Delta.
No, as I'm sure you did.
They're pretty good.
Yeah. But the person who was on, and he was explaining, Dale Comstock was his name. He was explaining, or at least that was what he's calling himself. He was trying to explain the difference between, what Delta Force is, and I'll just use that nomenclature, and what, the difference between them and the sort of the rest of the innumerate number of special forces regiments that the Americans have.
Yeah.
And his big differentiator was something that they got from yourselves, was the long walk. And the fact that they did everything by themselves, and they were never, ever told how well they were doing.
No,
they were always told, do your best, right? And your best needs to be good enough. Yeah. And you don't stop and help. Everything is by yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I've got respect for anybody that is a volunteer soldier, anybody that puts themselves in that situation at any level and any job. The special forces role has to be small. Special, small, they go together, small and special, SAS, as soon as an organization gets big, it's no longer special. And what happened with one of the best special forces units in history was the American Green Berets back in the 60s, when they were small and special. And they started as advisors in Vietnam. They developed from Korea into Vietnam, and they were extraordinary. Most of them had degrees, they spoke languages, and they were, in many ways, the formative ideas of the modern SAS came from them. But what happened is in the early 60s, I think it was President Kennedy said, I want 5,000 of these men by the end of the year. So it went from 500 to 5,000. And it became, and I shouldn't use the word just because that's wrong. It became another airborne unit then, because the special had gone out of it, the small had gone out of it. And the US Armed Forces now has their Special Forces division is bigger than the British Army. So they had to make a new Special Forces unit, which is Delta, and another one from the Navy, which is the SEALs. And again, back to small, back to special, which they are. And they're very, very good operators again, which is great to see.
But sorry, you'll forgive me if we jump ahead. We will come back to this. But don't you think that with the intended startup of the British Ranger Regiment, which is going to replicate what the Special Forces originally was, that sort of hearts and minds growth of enablers, you're laughing now. You're not thinking that's going to happen.
It's just all they're doing is taking an infantry unit and giving it a different name in order to make it appear important. The British Army has gone from my period, it was 175,000 men. Now it's down to less than 66,000. And you turn around and you say, of the 66,000 we've got left, of which only 20,000 are T-farms, we're now going to give them a special name to make them feel more important and more special. It's a ridiculous situation. What they need is more standard infantrymen so that you have a seed pool to create a special forces group from the best of that. But instead, we'll just amalgamate a few units, bring a few more lads into the army, give them a nice posh uniform with a dynamic badge, and call them Rangers, and steal the idea from the American Rangers from the Second World War. And all of a sudden they become special and important. And it's propaganda. It's a fallacy. It's wrong. When you had all those wonderful units with history going back 300 or 400 years sometimes, who have been disbanded for the purpose of expediency, accountancy, saving money. And now you want to create a new unit and give it a new name. It's false, it's wrong, and it won't make any viable difference.
Yeah, it was kind of strange to me. Sorry, Ron, we can go back to chatting about selection just now. But it was kind of strange to me because certainly when I was in Afghan contracting there, used to run into various British military units a lot, and you kind of looked at, that's what they were doing there the entire time. Right. Yeah. I mean, that was what BMAT was about, and that was what all the civil development was about. And thinking, okay, great, you're formalizing it. But yeah, we can go back to selection. So we'll go back. You're back in the Welsh Mountains on your own, learning more.
Step away from that minefield for a little while, shall we?
We'll backpedal.
Well, let's fast forward then, just a little bit, because. So Robin, a little bit of background. The Weekend Warrior show was started by a bunch of guys that like guns, braaiing, or I think you guys call it barbecuing, and shooting guns and drinking whiskey. So, and that's how I know Brian as well. So let's be honest about that. Well, yes, but so
I forgot the rolling around on the mats part and hitting each other for fun, because sometimes.
So one thing that so I know we've got guys that are shooters and gun enthusiasts on the group, on the that listen and tune into the show. So I want to go a little bit into the actual training part. I know the SAS pioneered a lot of the the CQB room clearing type work. It silenced MP5s, balaclavas, gas masks. Browning high powers, all the cool stuff. So, tell us a little bit about that. What kind of gear did you guys use at that time? What was a typical loadout? How much ammunition did you shoot? Yeah.
Well, the difference between a highly trained special forces soldier doing hostage rescue is the fact that you'd go through 400 rounds a morning. The weapons at that time were MP5s, submachine guns, Heckler and Koch, with 30 round magazines, and 9mm Brownings with a magazine. So you had a 20 round magazine, and that was your secondary weapon. Those were the two weapons that we carried all the time to do hostage rescue. When you were fully equipped, you had three magazines of 30 rounds on your left leg. You had your MP5 over your shoulder. You had two spare 13-round magazines of 9mm Browning on your for your pistol. You had the pistol low slung on your right hip, so it was hanging below your body armor on your right leg. And you had your body armor. You had your gas suit, and you had your gas mask. There was no balaclavas. There never was balaclavas. There was a gas hood over your gas mask. You had some very soft leather gloves that were made for helicopter pilots, and you had a special knife on your left, just below your left shoulder, for cutting your way out of obstructions. So it was an awful lot of material to carry. You had to be able to get in and out of windows, up ladders, and move very, very quickly. In terms of the quality of the training, we would actually put the targets up on the range, which was in an indoor range called the Killing House, and we would stand with our shoulders touching the targets while our comrades, in dimmed light, would have their backs to us, and they would turn, draw, and shoot the targets that were touching our shoulders. And you had to be able to put all your rounds within a 4-inch circle every single time, with the MP5 and with the 9mm Browning pistol. So that was the standards. And then you would put various targets around the room, sit a hostage in a chair, a live hostage, which was one of us, in a chair, and you would kick the door open and charge the room, going directly to the threat, and kill the targets and take your comrade from the room, hopefully alive. And we never got anybody out dead. So, but those were the levels of training you had, and I could draw at that time. I could draw and shoot and hit a man straight between the eyes every single time from 5 to 7 meters. Every single time, draw and shoot, bang, bang, with a gas mask on in dim light. That was how good you were. And you weren't that good because you were special people. You were that good because you had special instructors, you had a lot of time, and you had a lot of ammunition. That was why we were good.
So how did you guys choose the person who sat as the
we all took turns.
Hostage? Okay. So wasn't the person...
Everybody had to take a go. Everybody had to stand between the targets. You know,
okay.
There was trust built up with each other as well.
Okay, so it wasn't the person who hadn't paid for the round in the pub the previous night.
Yeah, the unpopular guy. Yeah.
Robin, but you know what? But that was also kind of, and tell me if I'm wrong. You know, that kind of really close quarters work. You know, being almost the speciality of it was a speciality of what you guys did, but it was also groundbreaking in the sense that you had to figure out new techniques. There was no manual for this, you know. Right. So
we created the manual, that's for sure. The basic rule, the policing system was to secure an area, create a cordon, and negotiate. And they did have sniper teams, not to kill. Our modus operandi was really kill the terrorists and save the hostages, not save the hostages and hope for an arrest. So, and of course, that was when law and order had broken down and the police could no longer cope. So you're put in that situation, you go to the threat, you actually attack the individual. Anybody that's been anything from a boxer to a nightclub doorman to a martial artist knows that that business, when you're under threat, of going straight to it is very disarming for the opposition, because it's not in their game plan. A guy picks up a baseball bat and you keep walking at him. You know, he now has to make a decision, and he hasn't already made it. And by the time he's made that decision, you're inside his range and you've hit him. And it's the same with a gun. You've gone straight towards him. You've walked at him and you've opened fire. And it's too late for him to make his decision, because it's not in their game plan. Their game plan is to kill kill a hostage, to maybe die themselves in the modern era, but it's not to encounter a person that isn't frightened of dying and is walking straight at them and engaging their threat. And that was something we had to rewrite again when you started getting to the modern extremist who wants to die. He doesn't want to create a political statement. He wants to enact something that is going to kill people and die himself. Under those circumstances, you can't afford to negotiate. So the deliberate or the immediate action has to happen straight away, because you know they're going to kill people anyway. They want to die. So you've got to have people that can go straight in. The police training has changed over the last decade, 20 years because of that. Because now you're not in a hostage negotiation situation. You're in a terror situation where they want to die, and they want to create as much publicity about their death as possible. So I'm all for giving them what they want and hopefully saving some people at the same time.
I think there was what you're talking about, how the police have adapted to that. Certainly in the UK was the most recent attack. Well, in France as well, right? But that most recent attack, when we had that knife attack, and there were two civilians one chap got a narwhal tusk from a barn and charged him down.
Extinguisher, yeah.
But what I was really happy to see was when the two SO19 or whatever they called now, because they also like changing their name, every so often. But when they got there, he didn't stuff around or anything. He got the civilian off, and he just said, right, end the threat. I don't know if you got a vest on, whatever it is, but you going down.
That's right.
And that was really good to see. I was very happy to see that.
He still had to answer to the law afterwards for that action, but it was
yes. But I mean, every single police officer knows. Certainly, in my experience, every single police officer knows that you do answer to the law, and that's fine. That's the way it should be for a police officer.
Yeah.
Right.
And a soldier.
And a soldier as well. And that is what differentiates us from the people who perpetrate criminal acts. We know we are answerable to the law.
That's right.
Anyway, sorry. There's my.
I know. I know Brian is itching to get into kind of some of the stuff that's going on, nowadays, across the world, and get your opinion, Robin. But one last question about, days gone past. The infamous event that put the SAS in the public eye for the first time. We can't have you on the show and not talk about it a little bit.
That's true. We're all dead.
That would be a big way. So, the Iranian Embassy siege, there's photos. There was a movie made. There's books about it. You were there, in your own words, take us a little bit through the lead up, the actual operation itself, whatever you feel comfortable telling us.
Well, it's again, my version of the story is in my book, Fighting Scared, in certain detail. The best program ever made about it is the BBC documentary SAS Embassy Siege by Louise Norman and Peter Taylor. Not just because I'm in it. But we waited 25 years before we spoke about it, and that was the first time. And anything else that's ever been made in the terms of a movie, I don't want to talk about because I'll have to throw up in my bucket down here. But that aside, going back to April 30th, 1980, we'd just taken over the counter-terrorist team from G Squadron. It was a 6-month rotation, so every squadron did 6 months at a time, and then it was passed on. So it was my first time on the team, and we were preparing to drive to Scotland to do a training exercise with the Edinburgh Police on the Monday morning, and the news came over on the radio that something had happened in London, that a group of terrorists had taken over the Iranian Embassy. So our move to Scotland was paused, and we waited to get intelligence on what was going on. And most of our accurate intelligence came from the BBC. So we sat and we waited, and our colonel, Mike Rose, he tried to pressure the government to get us closer to London, but he couldn't get permission. So he sent us home. And he said, "Look, we're going to be we might be away for a few days, lads. So go home, get some more gear, get some washing and shaving kit, be prepared for a long stay." And I went home and I put a note on the mantelpiece to my girlfriend, later my wife, which said, "Won't be home on Tuesday. Watch the news if you want to know any more." And that was all the information she was going to get. And that night we got permission from our colonel to drive closer to London, and we got to a place called Beaconsfield, so at 25 miles outside London. So now we're 125 miles closer to the incident area. The next day, on the Tuesday, we got permission to move to Regent's Park Barracks on Tottenham Court Road in London, where we holed up for the day. And we started to get more information more intelligence about the building, the people inside. The government and the police became more aware of our role, because nobody in the world had heard of us. We were Fred Carno's army in darkest Herefordshire. Nobody knew very much about us at all, and our counter-terrorist role was completely secret. On the Tuesday night, we all got into the back of a big yellow Pantechnicon truck, and climbed over a wall and got into the building next door, which was the Royal College of General Practitioners, which is the building next door to the Iranian Embassy. Once we got inside, we coordinated with the police, who set up an operations center, and we prepared what's called an immediate action. So if they start to kill people now, we have got a basic plan and areas of responsibility. Now, there's a whole squadron of us, which is 60 men, with approximately 46, 48 assault team members, including the snipers. And so we're all given areas of responsibility. If it all goes wrong, we're going to bash down the doors with sledgehammers. We're going to go in and we're going to kill the terrorists and try to save some of the hostages. In the meantime, the police are negotiating. A telephone link is set up inside, and the police negotiators try to calm things down and try to barter with the people inside. They managed to get the release of 3 hostages over the following few days. One by pretending he was sick, another was a pregnant woman, and another was Mustafa Karkuti, who was released as an act of goodwill after the BBC actually presented the terrorist case. There were 6 terrorists. They were armed with explosives, with hand grenades, and with small arms. And by the 6th day, there were 20 hostages left inside. On the 6th day, they became frustrated, and the leader of the tough guy of the terrorist team executed the charge d'affaires to the embassy, Lavazani, at the bottom of the stairs by putting 2 rounds in his head. And a short while later, the body was thrown out the front door. Margaret Thatcher had said, "We will not do anything. We will not mount any assaults, providing they don't kill anybody." Well, now they'd killed somebody. Margaret Thatcher gave permission to the Home Secretary, Willie Whitelaw, and we made final preparations to carry out a deliberate action. So over that 6-day period, we had the entry points. We'd done reconnaissance. We knew how thick the doors were, where the armored windows were. We had planned our entry points. We'd put ropes in position so that we could abseil down the outside of the building. We found steps. So the whole thing was put together quite well. It was just like an exercise. Within 20 minutes of the death of Lavazani, we were ready to go. And the cunning plan was that we were going to all creep up to our entry points, and the major in charge, Hector Gullen, was going to give go, 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 and we were all going to explode our devices at the same time and enter all our points. One of the guys abseiling down the back of the building put his foot through a window, and Salim, the leader of the terrorists, heard this window break and broke off negotiations and said, "I'm going to investigate." So Hector knew we'd been compromised and gave us the go, go, go early. So on that famous footage, you see John McAleese leap over and slam his frame charge on the window, and he's only about 4 feet away from it when it explodes. That wasn't part of the plan. That was what you had to do because all of a sudden everything had gone into super speed. I was on the back door, and the charges hadn't yet been made ready on the door. So Bob, again, back to my best man, he took the back doors out with a sledgehammer, and in they went. And it was mine and my partner's job to hold the back door and hopefully and go to anywhere where there was a problem. But the guy who had got stuck on his rope at the back window was hung above the balcony about 40 feet off the ground, and the curtains had caught fire where the guys had gone in with their flashbangs. And now he's starting to burn alive, and he's hanging just above these curtains. So he's kicking himself away from the wall. The guys on the top can't abseil down because of the fire. So they try to cut Tom away on a rope under tension, but they've got to get him on the inswing, because if they get him on the outswing, he's going to drop 20, 30 feet on the concrete. They managed to cut the rope on the inswing, and he lands on the balcony burned. In the meantime, Tommy Palmer had gone through the window there, and his head had caught fire. So he came back out, took off his gas mask, put the fire out, and then went back into the gas without any gas mask on at all, and killed 2 terrorists. On the front, Tommy McDonald had gone through the front window, and Trevor Locke, who was the British policeman who'd been inside all the time, had started wrestling with one of the terrorists, Salim, who had actually killed one of the hostages at that moment during the assault. And Tom came in and said, "Get away from him, Trevor." And Trevor rolled away, and he killed the terrorist on the floor. On the ground floor where I was, I looked up, and while Tom's burning, he's had his Pressel switch pressed, so all communications have gone down. So as soon as he cuts free, the communications come on. Hector doesn't know what's gone on inside, so just send in the reserves. So me and Ginge go in the back. And as we go in, it sounds like chaos because there's gunshots and screaming and explosions and everything else. And as we get inside into the foyer, you can see that the guys have done everything they're supposed to do. There's a chain of people up the stairs, and the hostages are starting to come down the stairs. Trevor comes down first. He's out the front door. The hostages come down. They're out the front door. One of the terrorists has got out with the hostages. And then there's a movement on the top of the stairs, and somebody shouts, "He's a terrorist." And as he comes clear at the bottom of the stairs, I'm about 5 meters away, and I fire a burst of 3 rounds. But there's another person stood very, very close to him who puts 24 rounds into him. So this guy's got a hand grenade in his hand, and so he's been shot. He's one of the terrorists. He's been shot. The building's now on fire. All the hostages are out. 5 of the terrorists are killed. 1 has escaped outside with the hostages, and the last man goes past me. I'm back holding the door again, and then we go down to help with the hostage control. And Sim Harris, the police BBC reporter, who was also a hostage, lying on the grass, and he's shouting, "He's a terrorist! He's a terrorist!" And he's pointing at what's his name, Fauzi Najad. And Fauzi is there, and he's been handcuffed on the floor. And me and a colleague pick him up and just separate him from the group, because you don't want terrorists laying down with the hostages. And later, people have cast aspersions on that, claiming that we were going to take him back inside and shoot him, which would have been a huge and ridiculous mistake, considering you're surrounded by just about every policeman in Britain, and you've done this marvelous operation. And then why would you do something so stupid? So we move him across the side, put him down, and then we go back we hand them over to the police. We go back into the College of General Practitioners, to great cheers. William Whitelaw comes, and he's crying his eyes out. He's the Home Secretary. And he said, "I knew it'd be good, but I never knew it'd be that good." And he wants to take us out and parade us in front of the world's press. But we all get back into the back of the big yellow lorry. And we disappear back to Tottenham Court Road, where we are met by Margaret Thatcher and her husband, Dennis. And we watch ourselves on TV. And then we sneak quietly back to Hereford in 2s and 3s in our vans and Range Rovers over the course of the evening, hoping that it's all going to die down within a few weeks. But here we are 42 years later, and we're still talking about it.
Oh, come on, Robin. You guys must have known you changed history. You must have known that.
I think as time went by, you realise more as history goes by, and especially after the documentary was made, of how relevant, how important it was as a part of British history and world history, because only 10 days before, the Americans had tried to rescue their own hostages from the American Embassy in Tehran, in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And it failed abysmally, and they'd lost 8 of their own people, and their bodies are paraded around the streets of Iran by the Republican Guard. So it gave the world a huge lift morale-wise. We can actually defeat terrorists. We can actually do something about them, and so it was bigger than just an operation.
Well, there's so much. So, from a political point of view, from a sort of moral, to your point, moral stand up, and we can fight back, and this is the caliber of capacity that we have. I mean, it's to your point, it resonates today. It's going to resonate. It's going to resonate in 200 years.
There was we got a plaque from the Commander U.S. Special Forces in Fort Bragg, and it's still in the SAS museum today. And it's got the big eagles on it and so on. But the little plaque underneath said, "Congratulations to the brave British commandos that mounted the raid on May the 5th, 1980. It just goes to show you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit."
So, if I can ask another question, now we're talking about the sense and occasion of history. So there we are, 1980. But certainly from an SAS perspective, there was something that was, I think, for the brand SAS, for the name, for the history SAS. There was another fairly significant event that happened during that time period as well, and we're talking about. Correct me, I think it's C Squadron, which was the Rhodesian SAS.
Yeah.
Yes, they disbanded at that time. Most of them went over to South Africa. How did that play in Hereford? Was there any impact at all?
No, not really. The squadrons in Hereford are A, B, D, and G. The G is because they came from Guards Independent Para.
They're the lot to fight all the time, correct?
They're good at cleaning boot. But the gap for C Squadron was always left in memory of them, it didn't really have any great significance because you'd had the unilateral declaration of independence there. The country was separate. You'd had your own wars, which we weren't involved in, but we still remained friends, and many of us ended up working on the circuit together. Some great guys that you and I both worked with over the years, and they're still out there, but they're aging old, fading away soldiers like me now.
Yeah, as we all get there.
Yeah.
And then, Robin, if I may, before we get, and I'm sorry, I'm aware we've been at this for a while, but I'll ask one more question if I can, Rowan.
Yeah, go ahead.
In Running Scared, one of the things that certainly came across definitely at my first reading of it was that your spiritual elements, your spiritual growth played a very big part in who you are, right? And that came through in the book.
You mean Fighting Scared?
Yes. But in that book, yes. Sorry, in Fighting Scared. But that I also got the impression that created a little bit of a distance between yourself and other members of the regiment.
I was never even going right back to my original, opening introduction. I was never capable of being one of the group. If you want friends as you grow up, you wear the same clothes, you like and dislike the same teams, the same people, and you follow the group, and you agree with your friends on everything. That's the essential recipe for being popular. there was something about my personality. Maybe I'm mildly autistic. And I would think, well, no, I disagree with that. No, I think he's a good bloke. Can't we talk about someone we like? And it wasn't deliberate. It was just part of my development, who I was. So I could either be, I couldn't be in the group because the group wouldn't let me. So I could be the whip puppy following the group, or I could lead. And those were my options. So as time passed, I ended up leading. I had friends, but my friends even today are relatively small in number. But I care very, very deeply about them. I tend to fall in love with my friends in a platonic way. And so often you're disappointed because people don't reciprocate that to you. So it's nothing. It's not a criticism of other people. It's just who I was and who I probably still am. Spiritually, I've come to understand and look at myself try to get outside and look at myself introspectively, recognize my own bad behavior, recognize the things I've done wrong, try not to make the same mistakes twice, try not to prove that I'm better than anybody else, that just get the best that I can out of myself. So I never let people tell me what I can't do, like the Yorkshireman at the back of the office. But that goes on in life. I've written songs, I've written poems, I've written books, I've been commissioned in foreign armies. I became the chief instructor of a renowned martial arts organization. And there's still more to do. And then I'll be gone and I will cease to exist. And I hope that when that's over, that I'll be left with the respect of my family and peers, and the rest doesn't really matter.
Well, dare I say it, I think you're going to be respected a little bit wider than that circle. I guess that sort of leads into the next question, and then we can start on some of the more modern stuff. But one of the things that I've always noted, and you'll forgive me, I need to set this a little bit. There's a little bit of context that needs to be set here. Typically, when someone follows such an illustrious career, etc., you speak of your former regiment with justifiable pride. But there's always, especially amongst authors, this tendency to over-exaggerate the capabilities and the capacities of one's former unit. And granted, it's usually done in a fairly disarming way, right? A little bit self-deprecating, but still, we muddled through and we toughed through and we did this because we were so awesome. And it's not just the SAS, by no means. But you're one of the few people who've been very adamant in setting the realistic understanding of what someone who's served in a special forces regiment actually is about. And no, they are not Superman, and no, they don't always get things right, and everything is not always sunflowers and daisies and jumping out of airplanes. And that's something that I've certainly appreciated a lot about the stuff that you share.
Yeah, there's I understand the reasons why people do what they do. It sells books for a start. But Special Forces soldiers are special at being soldiers. They're not special at anything else. So when people ask them to come and advise them on how they should live their lives, that's a huge error. And they come in. Special Forces soldiers come in all sorts of different colours. I remember a good friend who used to ask me to walk home with him after we'd been for a beer down the pub, and I'd say, why? He said, because if when I open the front door and you're there, my wife won't pick on me. And this is a brave soldier, and you see guys crying when the babies are born, and you also get the other side of it. Some of them are evil monsters, but they still good soldiers. But you wouldn't want to hang out with them, and you wouldn't want your daughter to marry them. because they're horrible and they're evil. And without the discipline and control that the army imposes on them, many of them would have been in prison. So, you know, they're not all knights in white shining armor either. And I don't aspire to the term hard man. Tough man, maybe, but not hard, because hard always has that image in my mind of somebody who's threatening and growling and staring at people and sharpening a knife and fancies himself as Superman. And that's definitely not me.
No, absolutely. I fully agree with you on that one.
No, there's so much we haven't even touched on in the show. We haven't talked about your time in Mozambique or the Falklands, but I don't want to keep you for much longer. But Brian, I know you had some questions, about what's going on, in modern times about the Ukraine and whatnot. So I'm gonna leave the next few questions especially for you.
Okay.
Cool. Robin, okay, so here's a good one, and I think certainly from again what you said, and I was also in my own little smaller circle fairly adamant about the fact that when Russia invaded the Ukraine, they were not going to exactly find the walkover that they thought they were. They had a very bad perception of not only their own history, but certainly of the Ukrainians. What were your thoughts 24th of February when you saw that they were actually stupid enough to pull the trigger and cross the border?
Well, initially, I thought what everybody else was thinking. It's going to be another Czechoslovakia or another Hungary, where they're going to parade it. They're going to storm into Kyiv, and they're going to put a puppet government there and get what they want. But they were absolutely shocked and surprised by the readiness of the Ukrainians to actually fight, and they were prepared to fight and they're prepared to die and defend their land. Added to that, the hubris, the overconfidence that the game was going to go exactly as they planned it, and they parked an army down a single road, and then started to run out of fuel. And the Ukrainians knew they were massing on their borders, while everybody in Britain was screaming and shouting about Boris Johnson's Christmas party 2 years ago. I was saying there's 150,000 Russian soldiers massing on the Ukrainian border, and nobody in the media was interested. So I started to write about it with great venom and anger. And of course, they were, no, they won't. It's just saber rattling. Well, they did. But when they did, they didn't know what they were doing. Their logistics, their command structure, their planning was absolutely disgraceful, and they got stuck. And if the Ukrainians had had a bigger air force, they would have wiped out the whole of that Russian army on that road. It would have been like the Falaise Gap all over again. An endless stream of Russian material and dead bodies going all the way back to Russia. And in some ways, the fact that they managed to withdraw some of their material is just testament to the fact that Ukraine didn't have air superiority and didn't have a big army, but it's got enough people. And now the situation has changed, and Russia is now trying simply not to lose. But there's a bigger picture that I wrote about today. 25% of the world's grain comes from Russia and Ukraine, and it goes out through Odessa, Mariupol, and Kherson in the south. And if those ports are closed and controlled by Russia, then they can hold the world's food sources over the red. They don't worry about nuclear weapons. It's food that people need, and it's food that is going to cause the big problem. It's food that is the biggest weapon of all. So, Ukraine.
Sorry, I was looking at that. Sorry, Robin, I was looking at that. And everyone thinks, how's this Ukraine-Russia war going to impact in places like Africa? That 25%, that's most of Africa. Somalia is almost 100% reliant on Ukrainian grain. Namibia is reliant on that. And, having grown up there, that's something I always look at. I think South Africa is a fairly substantial importer, not quite to the same levels. Mozambique, they almost complete. It's most of Africa. is within that 25% bracket. And the trade-off, if you're controlling the, never mind the nuclear war components of it, if you're controlling the food bank, you're controlling everything that those people are eating, the things that they have as well.
Yeah.
And Africa is quite well known for having a few key resources there.
Yeah. So I one of the things I actually said today was either that Ukraine wins this war very, very quickly and gets the control of those ports back quickly with Western help, or the West is going to have to make a decision. Either it sells Ukraine down the river in order to get that food supply back, and if Turkey lets it, they dominate the Black Sea and actually get directly involved to keep the food chain open. And I think that's far more likely than any kind of use of tactical nuclear weapons. It really is. And that's the big threat. And that's the big weapon that Russia might be able to manufacture if something isn't done quickly.
Almost exactly the same situation as in the Middle East with the Iran-Iraq war, and that Strait of Hormuz controlling the oil flow, etc., getting the oil flow out.
You can manage without oil for a period. There are stores, there are supplies, but when people get hungry, it brings governments down. It brings countries down.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, Ron, did you want to say something on this one? I saw.
No. It's one of those things where we can keep the show going probably for another hour and a half. But go ahead, Brian.
Okay. Just for the very much the Weekend Warrior audience members, I want to ask you something about military tactics here, based on the Ukraine. And I know you're not a cavalryman or a tanker, but you are somewhat of a subject matter expert, I would say, in asymmetric warfare. Should we put it that way, right? Okay. And how that is dealt, or how that deals with conventional threat. Is the day of the tank over?
No, the day of the tank isn't over. But I think if you look at the way the Russians tried to use their tanks, they got it completely wrong. There's something I want to say, but I'll go to the reason you asked that question is that the advanced shoulder-fired weapons now are so good that the balance has swung very much to the infantry defender. An infantryman with a javelin, with an N-law, can take out a T-72, a T-90 without any great problems at all, at very low cost in comparison. But the Russians did everything wrong with their tanks. They launched their attacks when the countryside was wet, so they couldn't get off the roads, because mud is the great enemy in winter war, in spring and autumn warfare in the Northern Hemisphere. It really is. And they couldn't get off the roads. They couldn't put their tanks out over the plains in central Ukraine. If they couldn't even get that far, because they were confined to the roads, which condensed them into a tight target area. Now they're trying to get them across rivers on pontoon bridges, and those crossing points have been registered. And artillery, and as the more advanced European and American artillery is arriving on the ground with the 155mm shells and the 30-kilometer range, now they're in a position to start outranging the Russian guns, which are 152 and have got about a 20-kilometer range. That's going to force them back. That's going to stop them shelling the major cities and give the advantage. At the same time, you've got the Russian army in the north at Kharkiv, starting to take out the horn of the northern horn of the Russians army. In the south, in Odessa, in Kherson, they're starting to advance there. And the Russians haven't managed to push through the center very much. So the two horns are getting pushed back. And as they get pushed back, the pressure is going to be on both sides, and they're not going to want to know where to deploy their forces. So I'm hoping to see a conventional victory, because we've got arms, ammunition, food, medicines arriving into Ukraine from the West in great numbers. I hope that Rand Paul stops his opposition and stops acting like a Russian agent for while he's in the American Senate or in American Congress, and they get that help added to what the Europeans and the Australians and the Japanese and everybody else is doing as well. because this is a war that has to be won. Because if it isn't, then you're going to have Finland under threat, Sweden under threat, and they're going to get their confidence back, and they're going to believe that they can dominate everybody with their autocratic regimes.
And now we have two Rowans